Okay, let's dive in. If you just pause for a second, wherever you are, and look around, chances are almost everything you see,
Hmm.
the device you're listening on, maybe the clothes you're wearing, the coffee you had this morning, it was probably made or sold by a company.
Oh, absolutely. They're like the hidden framework of our whole lives.
Totally. And today, we're really digging into that framework, specifically the corporation, this fundamental structure that basically runs modern business.
Exactly. We're looking at sources that explore what a corporation actually is, why businesses even bother becoming one, and the really key difference between private companies and the public ones you hear about all the time.
It's interesting, even the words themselves tell a story. Company, it sounds pretty friendly, comes from Latin, meaning companion.
Right, like sharing bread together. But corporation, that's where the real legal heft comes in. It's from corpus, the Latin word for body.
A body,
Like
like a
the
body of people joined up for business.
Precisely. And that idea of a body is, well, it's everything in the eyes of the law, not, the other kind of corpus, a corpse, though they share the root.
Yeah, right. Let's stick with the living business body. So this legal body, this is the core idea, right? Why do millions of businesses go through the process of incorporating?
Yeah, let's get into that because it's surprisingly easy to actually do.
All right.
You basically pay a small fee, file some paperwork. Often in Delaware, they have favorable laws there. You see Inc. after a company name. That means incorporated.
Simple enough.
Yeah.
But the effect of filing those papers, that's the kicker.
That's the kicker. So the law then views that corporation, this thing you just created on paper, as, well, as a separate person, an artificial individual.
A legal fiction.
A legal fiction, exactly. It can own property, it can sign contracts, it can sue people, and it can be sued. It can even be punished, usually with fines if it, misbehaves.
And that separation, that's the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the main draw for business owners.
It's the number one reason. It's called limited liability.
Okay, break that down. Limited liability.
It means the liability, the responsibility for debts or damages is limited to the corporation itself. It doesn't automatically pass through to the owners, the shareholders.
Right. Our sources use a great analogy. Imagine you borrow your parents' car, you're driving, you hit a tree.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, you are personally on the hook for the damage. But if that car was owned by, say, My Awesome Driving Services, Inc., and you own that company,
then the company takes the hit, not you personally. Your personal savings, your house, all that stuff is generally safe.
the company, the legal person, takes the rap.
That's the shield. Limited liability. And it's not just some small detail. It's fundamental to capitalism. Think about a huge disaster like the Exxon Valdez oil spill.
Oh, yeah. Massive environmental damage.
Yeah.
Millions of gallons of oil.
Right. Now, Exxon at the time had hundreds of thousands of shareholders, people who owned a tiny piece of the company.
Because regular folks, maybe,
Hmm.
with some retirement savings invested.
Exactly. Without limited liability, every single one of those shareholders could potentially have been sued, personally, for billions in cleanup costs and damages.
Wow. Your life savings wiped out because a tanker captain messed up thousands of miles away.
Potentially, yeah. Plus massive legal fees just defending yourself. Who would ever invest under those conditions?
Nobody. You wouldn't risk your house buying, 10 shares of a company if you could be liable for some catastrophic accident. Or even something small like a contaminated batch of food.
Exactly. Limited liability removes that specific fear. It says the absolute most you can lose as an investor, as a shareholder, is the money you put in to buy the shares. That's it.
So it encourages investment, which fuels the whole system.
It's why you see, like in the UK, companies often have LTD or limited after their name. Same idea. It's signaling that protection for the owners. Without it, the stock market as we know it it wouldn't function.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a crucial piece of the puzzle. But not all incorporated businesses are the same, right? There's this split between private and public.
Huge difference. Yeah.
So most companies are actually private.
Overwhelmingly so. Yeah. We're talking about businesses owned by just one person, or maybe a small group. Often it's a family.
Like the local pizza place or the garage down the street.
Yep. Or even really big companies. Think Mars, the candy company, or Levi Strauss Jeans. Huge operations, but privately held. Most hospitals, a lot of universities too, they're structured privately.
And the key thing here is
Yeah.
you can't just decide to invest in them, right?
Right. There's a barrier. You can love that local restaurant, think it's the best thing ever, but you can't just walk in and say, I want to buy a piece of this. Ownership is restricted. Unless, you marry into the family or something.
Okay, so that's private. What about public companies?
Public companies are the ones that sell shares of ownership, stock to the general public, usually on a stock exchange like the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ.
These are the big names we all know.
Yep.
The Hiltons, the Microsofts, the Coca-Colas.
Generally, yes. While there are fewer public companies overall compared to private ones, they tend to be much, much bigger. That's why, most people end up working for a public company or one of its subsidiaries.
And here's where the ownership model gets really different.
Totally different. Our sources call it maybe the most democratic institution around purely in terms of access to ownership.
How so?
Because anyone with the money can buy shares. It doesn't matter who you are, your race, your religion, your background. None of that matters. The stock market doesn't care.
Doesn't care if you have, as one source cheekily put it, bunions, pimples, or bad breath.
Huh, exactly. All that matters is if you have the cash to buy a share, you hand over the money, you get proof of ownership like a stock certificate or a digital record, and boom, you're instantly a part owner.
So, using an example like McDonald's, even if the CEO personally disliked you for some reason,
He couldn't stop you. Couldn't stop you from buying McDonald's stock on the open market. It's available 5 days a week during market hours. That openness, that accessibility is what defines a public company's ownership structure.
okay, so we have this massive world of public companies out there.
Thousands of them. Over 13,000 just in the U.S.
And they're everywhere. It's almost impossible to go through a day without interacting with dozens of them.
Oh, completely. Let's just walk through a hypothetical day using some of the examples our sources mention. It really drives it home.
All right, let's do it. Morning routine, getting dressed.
Okay. Maybe your underwear is Fruit of the Loom, public company. Your pants might be from Hagar or Farah, bought at Gap or The Limited, all public connections. The fibers in the clothes, maybe DuPont, Publix, could be Reeboks or Keds, maybe bought at Foot Locker. Foot Locker used to be part of Woolworth, another public giant, and how did you pay? Probably a Visa or MasterCard issued by a public bank like Citibank.
Wow, okay. Breakfast.
Cereal, Cheerios from General Mills or Pop-Tarts from Kellogg's, publicly traded. Orange juice could easily be from a division of Seagram or Coca-Cola Minute Maid, public. Baked goods like Entenmann's. Used to be owned by Philip Morris, which also owns Kraft and Oscar Mayer. All public threads.
It's like a web.
It is. How about the commute? Taking a bus, probably built by General Motors. Public. The steel in it, maybe Bethlehem Steel, historically public. Tires, Goodyear, public. Gas, Exxon Texaco, public. The company insuring the bus, Aetna perhaps, public. Yep. The bus line itself, maybe owned by Laidlaw, public.
Okay. I'm starting to see the pattern. What about media we consume? Books, entertainment?
Yeah, same story. Books published by McGraw-Hill, Houghton Mifflin, Simon & Schuster, all public or owned by public giants. Simon & Schuster, for example, now part of Paramount Global via legacy Viacom deals.
And those companies get bought and sold all the time, right?
Constantly. It's a dynamic landscape. Viacom swallowed Paramount. MCA Universal became part of Seagram, then Vivendi, then Comcast. Disney bought ABC. GE used to own NBC. Westinghouse bought CBS, which later merged back with Viacom, now Paramount Global. Time Warner bought CNN, then merged with AT&T, then spun off. It's dizzying.
Even popular TV shows.
The companies that syndicate them, like King World for Jeopardy and Oprah back in the day, often public or owned by public companies. Viacom, now Paramount, owns Nickelodeon, MTV.
Lunchtime. Grabbing fast food.
McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King.
Yeah.
And all public or divisions of public companies. Burger King was part of British Grand Metropolitan for a while, now Restaurant Brands International. And think about PepsiCo.
Right, not just Pepsi-Cola.
No. They owned Frito-Lay snacks. They owned Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, KFC for years, though those are now spun off into Yum Brands, which is also public. You invest in PepsiCo, you're investing in a massive slice of the food and beverage market. Most big candy brands, too, except for Mars and maybe some others, are public.
And just using the phone later, calling someone.
Yep. The phone companies themselves, whether it's one of the regional Baby Bells spun off from the original AT&T, or the newer giants like Verizon, or the current AT&T, or T-Mobile, which merged with Sprint. All publicly traded. You're constantly connected through this network of public corporations.
It's inescapable.
Pretty much.
But the flip side of this pervasiveness is accessibility, right?
Well,
you mentioned anyone can buy shares.
Exactly. And it's not necessarily expensive either. That's a key point in the sources.
You don't need to be a millionaire to own stock.
Not at all. You could become a part owner of the entire Disney empire, theme parks, movies, everything for, what, maybe a bit more than the cost of a single day's park ticket?
Oh, That's a great comparison.
Or own a piece of McDonald's for roughly the price of maybe 20 Big Mac meals.
Right.
The entry point to ownership can be surprisingly low.
And there's a certain satisfaction in that.
Yeah.
Our source mentions a thrill.
Yeah, the idea that you can walk into a store, maybe a Best Buy or a Target, see people lining up to buy things, and know that as a shareholder, you have a tiny piece of that action.
When you buy something from a company you own shares in, you're kind of paying yourself back in a very indirect way.
Exactly. It creates this loop, this beneficial chain reaction that fuels the whole capitalist system.
Explain that chain. How does it work?
Okay, step one. People like you invest money by buying shares of a public company.
Okay.
Step two. The company gets that money, that capital, and it uses it to grow. Build new factories, open more stores, develop new products, hire more people, upgrade technology.
That makes sense. Growth fuel.
Right. Step three. If the company uses that money well and becomes more successful, more profitable, its value increases. And the value of its shares goes up.
So the investors, the shareholders who provided the initial fuel, get rewarded. Their investment grows.
That's their direct return. The first link, rewarded. But it doesn't stop there.
What else happens?
Step four. A more prosperous company can usually afford to pay its employees better, give raises, and crucially, a more profitable company pays more in taxes.
The societal benefit.
Yeah. Those corporate taxes help fund everything else: schools, roads, police, public services. So the success fueled by individual investment ripples outwards.
It's quite a system when you lay it out like that.
It really is. And the scale is huge. We're talking over 50 million people in the U.S. alone. Men, women, even children through custodial accounts are part owners in these thousands of public companies.
So it's described as like the best method we've invented for letting the broad population share in the country's economic success.
That's the argument, yeah. It allows masses of people to have a direct stake in national prosperity.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The core idea of the corporation as a legal person, the vital shield of limited liability, the difference between locking yourself out of a private company versus easily buying into a public one.
And just how deeply embedded these public companies are in, well, everything we do, from breakfast to bedtime.
Right. It really makes you think. If being a shareholder is seen as this primary way to participate in economic growth, and you realize you can actually buy a piece of almost every major brand you interact with daily. Your toothpaste, your phone service, the company that made your car, or the bus you ride.
Yeah.
Does knowing that, really internalizing that accessibility, maybe change how you look at your next shopping trip or how you think about building your own financial future? Something for you to mull over.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into a really fascinating stack of sources tracing the history of American finance. And here's the big question we're starting with. How did this core idea of getting ahead, chasing profit, how did that go from being something morally condemned, almost like an X-rated activity, to becoming the absolute foundation of the modern world?
It's arguably the most significant ideological flip in, well, maybe the last 1,000 years. I mean, our sources show that for most of history, things like a paycheck, saving for retirement, they just didn't exist.
Right. The whole economic structure didn't really allow for it.
Exactly. If you think about early capitalism as just, say, making things or providing services for money.
That was the exception, not the rule.
Absolutely. For millennia, your average person, maybe a serf, a slave, a servant, they worked for a master.
They got their keep, right? Room and board.
Yeah, maybe a small hut, a little plot of land to grow some food. But no currency. No paycheck.
Because there was literally nowhere to spend it anyway.
Precisely. And culturally, this whole system had strong moral backing.
From religion, mainly.
Yes, since early Christianity and Judaism, the idea of seeking profit, and especially charging interest on loans, they called it usury, that was seen as inherently selfish, immoral.
You were basically booking yourself a spot in hell.
That was the belief. So this modern concept we have of getting ahead, climbing the ladder, it just didn't compute in the Middle Ages.
Okay, so let's track this massive shift. Fast forward to, say, the late 1700s, things are really starting to change.
Everything's turning upside down. You see wealth starting to move away from the traditional landowners, the princes and dukes.
And moving towards who?
Towards a new class that's rising fast. The merchants, shopkeepers, peddlers, traders, they're becoming richer, more powerful.
And this rise demanded, I guess, a new legal way of doing business.
Exactly. And this is critical, the legal origin of the corporation. If you wanted to start any significant business on royal lands, you needed permission.
A specific kind of permission.
Yes, a charter of incorporation from the monarch. That was the only legal way to operate.
And that's the direct ancestor of, like, Apple or GM today.
It really is. It's the blueprint for the modern corporate structure.
And these charters weren't just for, I don't know, local businesses. They were funding huge global ventures.
Oh, absolutely. We tend to focus on the explorers themselves, Columbus, Hudson.
But behind the scenes.
Behind every one of those ships sailing to the New World, there was this complex network of investors footing the bill. English, French, and especially the Dutch.
Right. And this need for huge amounts of capital, that led to something new, didn't it?
It did. It led to the invention of the world's first, truly popular public stock. In 1602, the United Dutch East India Company, the UDEI.
And where could you buy this stock? Not exactly Wall Street yet.
Not at all. You could buy shares right there on a bridge over the Amstel River in Amsterdam.
On a bridge? Seriously?
Seriously. And the crowds were apparently enormous. People were so eager to invest, pushing and shoving, they actually needed police to manage the chaos.
Wow. A literal stock market frenzy right from the start. Did it pay off for those early investors?
It did, actually. The optimists won. UDEI stock doubled, it paid regular dividends, and the company itself lasted for 2 whole centuries until 1799.
And this model, this joint stock company financing exploration, that directly fueled the colonization of North America.
Directly. We see the UDEI funding Henry Hudson's voyages. Then there's the Dutch West India Company.
They funded the famous Manhattan deal, right?
That's the one. Peter Minuit buying Manhattan for trinkets worth about 60 guilders. Still only around $24 in today's money. Incredible.
And the English were doing the same.
Yes, the English Virginia Company of London financed the Jamestown settlement.
And Jamestown is where we see a really crucial economic lesson learned the hard way.
Oh, absolutely. Because initially, the settlers worked the land, but they didn't own it. All the profits, everything they produced, went back to the shareholders in London.
Which didn't work out too well.
It was a disaster. Poor output, starvation, misery. The system lacked incentive.
Until they changed it.
Until they finally allowed the settlers to own property. And that realization, right there in Jamestown.
What was it?
That ownership creates incentive. That a person who actually has a stake in the outcome, who owns the land or the business, is just going to work harder and, frankly, be happier. That might be the first big economic ideological shift in the American story.
Which brings us, interestingly, to the Pilgrims. We think of them as purely religious figures, but they were also essentially a startup.
A heavily indebted startup. They had no cash. Their financing came from a group in London called the Adventurers, led by a hardware dealer named Thomas Weston.
And the deal wasn't great, was it?
Terrible. The initial deal was they had to work 4 days a week for the company for 7 years. Then they'd split the profits.
But it got worse.
Weston changed the contract right before they sailed, made it 6 working days a week for the company.
Leaving them basically no time for themselves.
Exactly. No time for personal farming, fishing, fixing clothes, anything. It was purely about maximizing return for the London investors. They actually sailed without even signing this new, harsher contract.
So, unsurprisingly, the Plymouth colony just hemorrhaged money?
Year after year, it lost money. The adventurers in London got completely fed up.
So what did they do? Just cut their losses?
They did. 1627, they basically washed their hands of it. They sold the entire operation, the colony, the land, all the debts to the Pilgrims themselves.
For how much?
1,800 British pounds. And crucially, the Pilgrims paid it back on an installment plan.
Wait a minute. The workers buying out the company using borrowed money?
You could absolutely call it the first leveraged buyout, or LBO, in American history. Like those big corporate takeovers in the 1980s, but with Pilgrims.
That's stunning. An LBO in 1627. And this leads to another huge ideological shift, this time from Governor William Bradford.
Right, because Bradford initially set up the colony along communal lines. Everything pooled, no private property, sort of communistic, really.
But he saw the same problems as Jamestown.
He saw it failing immediately. Same issue. If everyone gets the same share, regardless of how hard they work, where's the incentive? People slacked off.
So he pivoted.
He pivoted hard, switched to a free enterprise system. Farmers, fishermen, they could own their own plots, their own boats. They just had to pay a tax on their profits to the colony.
And it worked.
It worked. It recognized the power of self-interest, properly channeled. Bradford basically proved the concept. Aligned incentives drive productivity.
And once that idea takes root that self-interest isn't inherently evil, maybe even productive, the floodgates open. Not just for smart investing, but for, well, for mania.
Oh, absolutely. Explosive enthusiasm, which leads inevitably to speculation, bubbles, and spectacular crashes. The pattern starts early.
Like the Mississippi Company in France, early 1700s.
Classic example, founded by a guy named John Law. He was actually a Scottish gambler and mathematician.
And a fugitive, wasn't he? Killed someone in a duel.
That's right. Fled Britain. This convicted killer convinces the French regent to let him set up a bank, print paper money to pay off national debt.
Okay, that already sounds dodgy.
It gets better. He then promotes the Mississippi Company, promising unbelievable treasures from French Louisiana. Gold, silver, jewels.
And people bought it.
Hook, line, and sinker. Parisians went absolutely hysterical buying shares. The price soared. On paper, the company became worth more than all the gold believed to exist in France.
Utter madness, and the crash must have been devastating.
Complete collapse. It wrecked the French economy and their banking system for years. Law had to flee again.
And the English weren't immune either. They had their own bubble.
Right around the same time, yes. The South Sea Company.
What were they promised?
A monopoly on trade with the South Seas. Basically Spanish South America. Again, huge promises of wealth. Stock prices tripled almost overnight.
And this triggered a wave of other crazy schemes.
Just absurd companies popping up. People were throwing money at anything. A company for a perpetual motion machine. One for importing walnut trees from Virginia.
Didn't I read about one that was particularly brazen?
Oh yeah, the best one. A company that literally refused to tell investors what it planned to do. Just asked for money for an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. And people invested.
Unbelievable. It's like the dot-com bubble, but 300 years earlier, and even brilliant minds got caught up.
Famously, Sir Isaac Newton, he invested early in the South Sea Company, made money, got out, then saw his friends getting richer, jumped back in at the peak, and lost a fortune.
Leading to that great quote.
Yes, I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. A costly lesson in market psychology.
So while Europe is learning about bubbles the hard way, back in the newly formed U.S., you have Alexander Hamilton trying to build a stable financial system from scratch.
He knew the country needed banks, reliable currency, national credit. He was the architect, really.
But he faced major opposition.
Huge opposition, primarily from Thomas Jefferson.
The gentleman farmer.
Exactly. Jefferson hated banks, hated paper money. He believed true American virtue was in farming, in the soil. He envisioned a nation of independent yeoman farmers.
It's ironic, isn't it, given his own financial end?
Very ironic. Jefferson, despite inheriting wealth, died deeply in debt, virtually bankrupt. His anti-financial stance didn't serve him well personally.
So this fundamental tension, Hamilton's financial urban vision versus Jefferson's agrarian ideal, it's baked into America from the start.
Absolutely. And despite Hamilton's efforts, America quickly proved it was just as prone to financial fever as Europe.
How so?
Early investors got overexcited about the first bank stocks, especially the Bank of the United States. Yeah. They bid prices up way too high using borrowed money.
Leading to
The very first Wall Street crash, the crash of 1792.
And the reaction was pretty severe.
Very severe. The New York State Legislature actually passed a law, similar to one in London after the South Sea Bubble, making unlicensed stock trading a crime. It forced trading underground, literally under a buttonwood tree on Wall Street, which is the legendary origin of the NYSE.
Wow. So finance was already controversial, already going through booms and busts right at the nation's founding.
But alongside this volatility, something else was happening. Incredible innovation and real economic growth.
Driven by
American ingenuity, often spurred by a unique challenge. A huge country with not enough people.
So labor-saving inventions were key.
Exactly. Fulton's steamboat, Whitney's cotton gin, McCormick's reaper. These weren't just clever ideas. They were responses to the economic reality of needing to do more with less manpower. The U.S. economy grew eightfold between the 1790s and the Civil War.
And some early companies managed to navigate all this chaos and survive for centuries.
They did, especially private ones that could adapt. Look at J.E. Rhodes & Sons, started in 1702 making buggy whips.
Not much call for those anymore.
Right, but they adapted, moved into industrial belts, conveyor belts, still around today.
Any others?
The Dexter Company, founded 1767, started as a grist mill, then moved into stationery, tea bags, glue. Now they make high-tech industrial coatings. Adaptation was everything.
Though the first public company wasn't until later.
Not until the Bank of North America in 1781. Early success was often private.
Okay, so innovation is humming along, but the financial system is still prone to overheating. What was the next big mania after the early bank stocks?
Railroads. After about 1835, railroads were the absolute hot item, the internet stocks of their day.
And everyone wanted in.
Everyone. Investors bought anything with rail in the name. Huge amounts of land were bought, track laid, often financed with massive speculation and bank loans.
Setting up another fall.
The huge homegrown bubble. It burst in the panic of 1837. Stock prices crashed, land prices collapsed, banks failed across the country. People's savings were wiped out because, remember, there was no FDIC, no deposit insurance back then.
Another cycle of boom and bust. And this era of rapid, often ruthless industrial expansion paved the way for the robber barons.
The Titans. Men who built fortunes on a scale never seen before, dwarfing kings and pharaohs. Jay Gould, Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt made his first pile in shipping, then railroads, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Left $100 million, an almost unimaginable sum, then entirely to his son William.
And their attitude towards the public?
Well, the Commodore felt he'd done enough good just by building the railroad. His son William was even more direct. When asked about the public impact of his decisions, he famously snapped, "The public be damned."
The public be damned. That really captures an attitude. And who was the biggest of them all?
Arguably John D. Rockefeller, son of a literal snake oil salesman, incredibly disciplined, ruthless, and visionary in his own way, built Standard Oil.
And that attitude, the public be damned, combined with immense wealth, leads directly to the next big threat to the system, monopolies.
Exactly. Because the whole point of capitalism, theoretically, is competition. Competition keeps prices fair, encourages innovation.
But a monopoly kills competition.
Completely. If one company controls an entire industry, like in the board game Monopoly, they can set prices, dictate wages, stifle innovation. It undermines the whole system.
And Rockefeller figured out a clever way to build one.
Well, his lawyer did,
Yeah.
SCT Dodd. In the early 1880s, they used a legal structure called a trust.
How did that work? It wasn't just merging companies.
No, because that was often illegal under anti-cartel laws. A trust was sneakier. Shareholders of supposedly competing companies would secretly hand over their stock with voting rights to a central board of trustees, Rockefeller's board.
So Standard Oil controlled dozens of competitors from behind the scenes.
Precisely. They could coordinate prices, allocate markets, crush actual competitors, all while maintaining the illusion of separate companies. Rockefeller used threats, predatory pricing. He ended up controlling 90% of U.S. oil refining.
And other industries copied this model.
Oh, yes. Sugar, tobacco, whiskey.
Hmm.
The trust became the way to monopolize. But eventually, the public and politicians got alarmed.
Leading to the trust busters.
First, the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, though it wasn't strongly enforced initially. Then Teddy Roosevelt really took up the cause. He became the nation's trust buster.
He actually sued these powerful companies.
He did. Revived the Sherman Act, sued 44 major trusts, including Standard Oil, which was eventually broken up by the Supreme Court.
And does antitrust action still work? Does breaking up monopolies actually benefit consumers?
The evidence suggests yes. Look at a more modern example. The breakup of AT&T, Mahdia Bell, in the 1980s.
What happened then?
It was forced to split into 8 smaller regional companies, the Baby Bells. Instantly, you had real competition in long-distance service. The result? Call volume tripled and rates plummeted. It showed the power of restoring competition.
Okay, so we've seen cycles of innovation, speculation, crashes, regulation, monopolies, trust busting. It's a chaotic ride. Which brings us to the big one, 1929.
The crash. The event that still looms so large in the public imagination.
And we really need to address the mythology around it, particularly the idea of mass suicides.
That's probably the biggest myth. The image of stockbrokers jumping from windows. It's pervasive, but largely untrue. Our sources are clear. The national suicide rate did not significantly increase in the weeks or months after the crash.
So where did the stories come from?
Some were isolated incidents, maybe misinterpreted. Some just dark humor that caught on, like the comedian Will Rogers joking that hotel clerks started asking guests, "You want a room for sleeping or for jumping?" That kind of thing fueled the legend.
But there were real victims, obviously. Who was hit hardest?
The people who had bought stocks on margin?
Meaning they borrowed most of the money.
Exactly. You could put down maybe 10% cash and borrow the other 90% from your broker, betting the stock price would keep rising.
A huge gamble.
Massive leverage. When prices collapsed, not only was their investment wiped out, they were instantly left with enormous debts to the brokers. debts they often couldn't possibly repay. That was the real financial devastation for many individuals.
And it's crucial to separate the crash from the Great Depression that followed, right?
Absolutely critical. The 1929 crash did not cause the Great Depression of the 1930s.
What did then?
The Depression was a much bigger, more complex event. It involved a global economic slowdown that was already underway, combined with terrible policy mistakes, particularly by the Federal Reserve. They actually tightened the money supply, pulling cash out of the system when it desperately needed liquidity.
Yeah.
That turned a recession into a catastrophic depression.
But the trauma of the crash and the Depression did lead to fundamental changes in the financial system.
Oh, absolutely. A complete overhaul aimed at preventing a repeat and protecting investors. Before 1929, the market was, well, kind of a free-for-all.
Insider trading was okay.
Common. Rampant, even. Companies didn't have to disclose much information. One source described it perfectly. It was like a poker game, where the pros could look at their cards and you had to wear a blindfold.
So what changed?
The government stepped in decisively. They established the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, in the 1930s,
Its job.
basically to be the financial police, to stop Wall Street hanky-panky, enforce rules about disclosure, prosecute fraud, and crucially, ban insider trading.
And those insider trading laws are serious now.
Extremely strict. If you gain access to confidential, non-public information that could affect a stock price, say you overhear executives discussing a massive merger or a huge new contract, you are legally barred from trading on that information. The SEC monitors trading patterns constantly, looking for suspicious activity. The playing field is much, much more level now.
Yet, even with these new protections, the SEC, the Federal Reserve acting as a stabilizer, Federal Deposit Insurance, FDIC protecting bank accounts, the fear lingered for a long time.
Decades. The ghost of 1929 haunted generations. Most ordinary Americans completely avoided the stock market. In 1952, believe it or not, only about 4.2% of the U.S. population owned any shares at all.
Just over 4%.
Think about that. It means the vast majority of people, playing it safe rather than sorry, completely missed out on the incredible bull market of the 1950s and 1960s, one of the greatest periods of wealth creation in history.
When did that start to change? When did people start coming back to the market?
Gradually. It really took until the 1980s and especially the 1990s for widespread participation. By 1990, you had over 51 million Americans owning stocks.
Often indirectly.
Yes, very often through mutual funds, which was a huge innovation in itself. It allowed people to buy a small piece of many different companies, diversifying their risk instead of betting everything on one or two stocks. That spread both the risk and the potential rewards much more broadly.
So, looking back over this whole journey, we've gone from a world where profit was literally considered a sin, where lending money could land you in hell, where banking was done in secret,
to today's highly regulated, highly public system. Still driven by profit, yes, but with guardrails, transparency requirements, and widespread ownership unthinkable centuries ago. A system built through cycles of incredible ingenuity, speculation, crashes, and reforms.
It's been quite a ride. And if we look at the big picture today,
Well, think about this. Despite all those panics and crashes we talked about, 1792, 1837, 1907, 1929, the U.S. hasn't actually suffered a full-blown 1930s-style economic depression since then. We've had recessions, yes, quite a few.
but the system didn't completely collapse.
Right, because the system now has stabilizers built in that didn't exist before the Great Depression. The Federal Reserve is much more active in managing liquidity. You have FDIC insurance protecting deposits, Social Security providing a safety net. These things cushion the blows.
So the odds of a modern recession snowballing into a total depression seem much lower.
Historically speaking, since World War II, the odds have effectively been zero. The U.S. has navigated 9 recessions since then without any turning into a depression.
Which leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you, our listener, to mull over. Given this history, given the modern safeguards, if history doesn't necessarily have to repeat itself in the exact same way,
Is the biggest financial risk today still being the person who stays completely out of the market, terrified by the ghost of 1929? The person who prioritizes avoiding any risk, but in doing so, potentially misses out on decades of growth and prosperity.
something to think about. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to pull out the most valuable insights from our sources, basically giving you a shortcut to getting informed.
And today, we're tackling something huge: building financial independence.
Right. The basics of investing, saving, making your money actually do something for you. Everyone has that dream, don't they? The cabin, maybe traveling the world.
Sure, but the problem is, most people just wait too long. They put it off.
And that waiting, according to everything we've looked at, is the absolute worst thing you can do because the biggest asset you have, especially when you're young, well, it isn't money.
No, it's not expertise either. It's just time. Plain old time.
That's the core idea, isn't it? Time is the magic ingredient.
It really is. It's what lets compounding do its work.
Yeah.
If you wait, say, until your 30s, maybe even 40s,
Hmm.
you've lost those crucial early years.
The years where growth is steepest.
Exactly. You're basically starting way behind. It's like trying to climb a mountain, but you're starting from the bottom of a ditch.
So let's dig into the high cost of just waiting. People get busy, right? Life happens. Mortgages, kids, car payments.
Uh-huh. And whatever little bit might be left over, it often goes on, stuff. Consumables, maybe a fancy gadget. And those golden years for investing, poof, gone.
But there's this huge advantage if you can grab it early. Like maybe when you're still living at home, expenses are minimal then.
Oh, absolutely. That's potentially the biggest head start anyone can get. If your parents are covering food, maybe rent, and you have a job,
Yeah.
you can funnel a serious chunk of that income straight into investments, assets, before life gets complicated and expensive.
It's interesting, too. The sources picked up on this trend. You hear a lot about millennials, Gen Z moving back home, often painted negatively, like freeloaders or something.
Right, but there's this hidden upside, or maybe a good side, as the sources put it. It can be a really smart tactical move.
Tactile saving.
Yeah. Think about it. These younger generations, they saw the previous ones maybe relying too much on credit, spending everything. They also figured out Social Security. Well, it's not something you can totally count on for retirement.
So they're being smarter, quieter about it.
It seems so. Quietly stashing money away, sometimes saving way more aggressively than their parents ever did, who might have been more into that instant gratification buying.
We've got this great little story that sums it up perfectly. Joe Big Belly versus Sally Cartwheel.
Ah, yes, the classic comparison.
So Joe, he wants the cool car, buys a new sports car, maybe 20 grand, gets an $18,000 loan. He thinks, oh, it's just $400 a month.
But that $400 a month adds up, doesn't it? Over 5 years, with interest.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually paid something like $26,000.
And what's he got at the end?
A 5-year-old used car, worth maybe, $5 grand? If he's lucky, and he's probably bored of it by then anyway. So $26,000 spent for an asset worth $5,000 that he doesn't even really like. Ouch!
Okay, now Sally Cartwheel.
Yeah.
She does things differently.
Totally differently. She needs transport, so she buys a cheap used car, maybe an old Escort for $2,000, pays cash.
Sees it as a tool, not a statement.
Exactly. And that $400 a month that Joe was pouring into his car payment, Sally takes that same amount,
And invests it.
puts it into a simple mutual fund, month after month, for 5 years.
And the result?
Well, thanks to consistency and compounding, 5 years later, Sally's looking at an investment portfolio worth nearly $30,000.
Wow. While Joe has the used car.
Right. Sally's got a serious asset, a down payment maybe, a retirement nest egg started. Joe's got, depreciation and memories of interest payments. It just shows the power of focusing on assets over image.
It really drives home that point.
Yeah.
Your money, your capital is just as important as your job, your labor. You need to put that capital to work.
That's the core of investing. It's that compounding magic. Let's say you just put aside $500 a year, not a huge amount.
Okay.
Do that for 10 years. At, say, a 5% interest rate, you've put in $5,000 of your own work, right? Your labor.
Makes sense.
But your balance isn't $5,000. It's over $6,600. That extra $1,600, that wasn't you working. That was your money working for you, even while you slept.
Okay, so if that's money working for you, then debt must be the opposite.
Exactly. Debt, especially that high-interest consumer debt, is like saving in reverse. It actively works against you.
Credit cards.
Oh, yeah. The credit card companies, well, they love it when you don't pay off the full balance each month. Why wouldn't they?
Because they charge huge interest rates.
Sometimes 18% or even higher.
Mm.
The sources point out, kind of shockingly, that you carrying a balance can be a better investment for the credit card company than a blue-chip stock is for you.
That's depressing.
It is. Think about that $400 TV example. If you buy it on a credit card and only pay the minimum payment each month,
You end up paying way more.
you could easily end up paying $800 in total for that $400 TV. You've doubled the cost. For something that's probably worth less over time anyway.
That's just throwing money away.
Completely.
Yeah.
And you scale that up. The total consumer credit card debt is staggering. Hundreds of billions. The interest paid on that debt, tens of billions every single year. It's a massive drag on people's ability to build wealth.
It wasn't always like this, though, was it?
No, the sources remind us, go back a couple of generations, before credit cards were everywhere, like before Diners Club really kicked things off, people just waited,
Saved up.
bought things with cash, avoided interest completely, and there was apparently a real sense of pride in that, in the saving, the waiting, the achieving.
So the message is pretty clear. Save early. Start now.
Yeah,
And kill that high-interest debt as fast as possible.
absolutely. That's grade A+ financial behavior. Spending everything you earned is maybe a C-. Running up credit card debt, that's an F.
Okay, so let's say you've got the debt under control, you're saving, where does the money go? The sources lay out 5 basic investment types, right? And there's always this tension.
Safety versus inflation. Yeah, you want your money safe, obviously. But inflation is this constant, quiet erosion of your buying power. If your investments don't beat inflation, you're actually getting poorer over time.
And inflation's been a bigger issue lately than when these sources were first written, so this is even more critical now.
Definitely.
Okay, let's start at the super safe end. Short-term stuff. Savings accounts, CDs, treasury bills.
Right. The pros are simple.
Hmm.
Your money's generally insured, it's liquid, meaning you can get it quickly, and you know exactly what return you'll get, even if it's small.
Good for emergency funds, paying bills.
Perfect for that, parking cash you need soon. But the big downside is that interest rate. It's usually really low. Often it doesn't even keep up with inflation.
So you're losing buying power.
Potentially, yes. If inflation is, say, 3% and your savings account pays 1%, well, you're losing 2% of your money's value every year, just sitting there. So great for safety, not for growth.
Okay, number 2, collectibles. Stamps, coins, art, maybe old cars.
Yeah, the idea is you buy something hoping it becomes rarer or more desirable, or just that inflation pushes up its nominal price.
Sounds a bit risky.
It can be. Very.
Okay.
The sources are pretty cautious here. Collectibles can be lost, stolen, damaged by fire or floods. Insurance costs money, which eats into any profit.
And you have to find someone to buy it.
Exactly. They're not liquid like stocks or cash. And let's be super clear. Your daily driver, your new car, never an investment. It loses value the second you drive it off the lot. Maybe a very rare antique car, kept in storage, rarely driven. Maybe. But it's niche.
Got it. Okay, moving on. Real estate. Buying a house or an apartment.
Now you're talking. For most people, their home ends up being their single best investment.
Why is that? 2 big reasons, right?
Yep. First, you get to live in it while it hopefully goes up in value. That's a huge benefit, shelter, and potential appreciation. Second, and this is the really powerful part, leverage.
Leverage, meaning you're using borrowed money.
Right. You don't usually buy a house with 100% cash. You put down maybe 10%, 20%, and borrow the rest via a mortgage.
Let's do that math example they gave. A $100,000 house. You put down $20,000 cash.
Okay. Now, let's say the house value goes up by just 3% in a year. That's $3,000.
Okay, $3,000 profit.
But wait, you didn't invest $100,000 to get that $3,000. You only invested $20,000 of your own cash.
So $3,000 profit on a $20,000 investment, that's a 15% return.
Bingo. That's leverage amplifying your return. Plus, unlike renting where the money just vanishes.
Like Joe Big Belly's rent money.
Exactly. Paying a mortgage forces you to save. Every month, part of your payment reduces the loan principal, building your equity. It's like an automatic savings plan built into your housing cost.
Makes sense. Okay, 4th category, bonds. You called them IOUs earlier.
Yeah, basically. When you buy a bond, you're lending money to someone, could be the U.S. government, a city, good company.
And they promise to pay you back.
They promise to pay you a fixed amount of interest over a set period and then return your original investment, the principal, on a specific date, the maturity date.
So they seem safer than stocks.
Generally, yes. The interest rate is usually known up front, and the repayment is guaranteed, assuming the issuer doesn't go bankrupt, which is rare for governments or strong companies. Less guesswork than stocks.
But there's a catch. The McDonald's example was eye-opening.
Oh, definitely. While the McDonald's bondholders were getting their steady, maybe modest interest payments back in the day,
The stockholders were.
making a fortune. They owned a piece of the company, shared in its massive growth. Their investment grew hundreds of times over. The bondholders, they got their original money back, sure.
But inflation.
Inflation had killed the buying power of that principal. What they got back bought far less than when they first invested it. That's the main danger with bonds, especially long-term ones. Inflation risk.
Which leads us neatly to number 5, stocks. Owning a piece of a company.
The growth engine. Statistically, if you look over long periods, Stocks have provided the best returns outside of owning your own home.
Better than bonds, better than cash, certainly better than just letting inflation eat your savings.
Way better. When you own stock, you share in the company's profits. You might get dividends, cash payments, and companies can, and often do, raise those dividends over time. Bond interest is fixed.
And historically, the returns have been solid.
Very solid. The sources cite the S&P 500, a big basket of U.S. stocks, returning nearly 12% annually, on average from 1945 to 1994. That kind of return crushes inflation over the long haul. It's why stocks really need to be the core of a long-term growth plan.
Okay, so stocks are key for growth, but that potential comes with needing the right strategy, discipline. And again, it comes back to
Time. Always time. The sources are relentless on this. For stocks, you need to be thinking long-term, like 20 years, minimum.
20 years. That's a long commitment.
It is, but that's what allows you to ride out the bumps. Markets go up, they go down, they have corrections. If you have that long time horizon, you can wait for the recovery.
And let compounding really work its magic over decades.
Exactly. That $10,000 example is powerful. Invest $10 a day, let it compound at, say, 11% a year for 20 years.
Yeah.
You don't touch it.
It becomes
Over $80,000. That wasn't about brilliant stock picking. That was about time and discipline.
And the people who lose consistently, the chronic losers, what's their mistake?
They usually don't have a plan, or they have one, but they abandon it when things get scary. The market takes a dive.
They panic.
They panic, emotions take over, they sell low, locking in their losses, thinking they'll get back in later. They turn into short-term traders instead of long-term investors. And they almost always lose. You have to stay invested. Through thick and thin, as they say.
That discipline also means not trying to time the market, right? Jumping in and out.
Oh, absolutely forget about market timing. It's a fool's game. Nobody, and I mean nobody, can consistently predict the market's short-term zigs and zags.
There was that statistic about how much of the gains happen on just a few days.
Yeah, that was striking. Over one really good 5-year period, the overall annual return was huge, like over 26%. But most of that gain happened on just 40 specific trading days.
40 days out of 5 years. That's not many.
Not at all. So if you were trying to be clever, jumping in and out, and you missed those key 40 days,
Your return would plummet.
plummeted down to something like 4%, barely beating inflation, maybe worse than a CD, all because you tried to outsmart the market instead of just staying put.
So the takeaway is invest money you can afford to leave alone for a very long time, and then leave it alone.
Pretty much. Stay fully invested, let time and the overall growth of the economy do the work.
Okay, so we're committed. Stocks, long term. Now, how do we actually do it? Two main paths seem to emerge. Mutual funds, the easier way, or picking your own stocks, the adventure.
Right. Mutual funds are great for simplicity and instant diversification. You give your money to a fund.
And a professional manager picks the stocks for you.
Exactly. You instantly own tiny pieces of dozens, maybe hundreds of different companies. Spreads the risk. The advice here is usually to stick with pure stock funds for long-term growth, not funds that mix in a lot of bonds.
And the sources specifically mention small cap funds, funds investing in smaller companies.
Yeah, historically, smaller companies have sometimes grown faster than the big giants, so they can offer higher potential returns over the long run. But they also tend to be more volatile, more ups and downs.
Something to be aware of. What about costs with mutual funds?
Crucial point. You have to watch the fees. Every fund charges an annual expense ratio, could be 0.5%, could be 1%, sometimes even 2% or more. That fee comes out of your return every single year, whether the fund does well or poorly. It adds up.
And paying higher fees doesn't guarantee better results.
Not at all. Loads of studies show that no-load funds, ones without an entry fee, perform just as well on average as load funds. And funds with lower annual expenses often outperform higher-cost funds over time, simply because less is being skimmed off the top.
So for people who don't want to pick a manager or worry about fees, there's the index fund option.
The elegant solution, really. An index fund just tries to match a market average like the S&P 500. It runs on autopilot, no expensive manager making bets.
So you're guaranteed average performance.
Yep. Which sounds kind of boring, but here's the kicker. Because their fees are incredibly low, index funds often end up beating the majority of actively managed funds over the long term, simply because they aren't dragged down by high costs.
Okay, so that's the simpler path. What about the adventure? Picking individual stocks.
This is more hands-on. The goal here is to find great companies that can grow their profits consistently over many, many years.
You don't need hundreds of winners.
No, the sources say you only need a few really big winners in your lifetime. Triples, they call them. Stocks that go up threefold or more to build serious wealth.
But you need to know what you're doing. Practice first.
Highly recommended. Start a fantasy portfolio. Pretend you have, say, $100,000. Pick some stocks of companies you know, maybe Disney, Nike, Microsoft, whatever. Track them. See how they do. Make mistakes on paper, not with real money. It's invaluable learning.
And when you do start picking for real, there's a hierarchy of methods. Avoid the bad ones.
Definitely avoid throwing darts or acting on hot tips from your cousin. Slightly better are educated tips or maybe your broker's buy list. But even then, you need to do your own homework.
The highest form is doing your own research.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which boils down to two things. First, keep your eyes peeled. Be observant in your daily life.
How's that coffee shop doing? Is this store always busy? Is that tech company's product actually good?
Exactly. Pay attention. Notice trends. See which companies seem efficient, popular, well-run. If you work for a public company, you have an inside edge in judging how things are really going.
And the second part.
Study the numbers. This means digging into the company's financial health. Look at their earnings. Are they growing? How much debt do they have? And importantly, look at the valuation, things like the PE ratio.
Okay, PE ratio, price to earnings. What does that tell us?
It's basically the stock's current price divided by its annual earnings per share. So a PE of 20 means investors are willing to pay $20 for every $1 the company currently earns.
So it gives you a sense of whether the stock is cheap or expensive compared to its profits.
Precisely. It's a key metric for judging value. Is it a bargain, or is the price already reflecting a lot of future optimism? You need to understand the numbers, not just the story.
All right, last hurdle. Getting started, especially for young people. Commissions used to be high, and you need to be an adult to open an account.
Yeah, those were barriers. But things are getting easier. One major source of early capital, maybe surprisingly, relatives.
Ask grandma for stock instead of savings bonds.
Exactly. Or ask for a share of Nike stock instead of the latest pair of Nike shoes. It helps shift everyone's mindset from just consuming to owning a piece of the company.
And for buying shares directly.
There's a growing trend of companies offering direct investment programs, or DIPs. You can buy shares straight from the company, often bypassing brokers entirely.
Lower commissions.
Sometimes zero commissions, especially for ongoing investments, after maybe an initial minimum purchase of a few $100s.
Yeah.
It makes it much easier to invest small amounts regularly. There are also organizations like the NAIC that have programs to help people buy small numbers of shares directly.
So the barriers are definitely coming down.
They really are. The key thing to remember is that the financial markets, stocks and bonds, they aren't just some casino for the rich. They're vital to how the whole economy works, how companies grow and create jobs. Understanding them is important for everyone.
And it starts with connecting the companies to their stock prices.
Right. Remember, a stock's price ultimately is tied to the company's ability to make money, its earning power.
So here's a final thought, something to chew on. Start looking around you at every single purchase you make. That coffee, that movie ticket, that app you just downloaded.
Ask yourself, which company is making money here? Why are they successful? Are they efficient? Do customers love them?
Thinking like a stock picker, even just observing, that's the very first step, isn't it, towards understanding how wealth is built and maybe, just maybe, achieving that financial independence yourself. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really getting into a massive topic, the complete life story of a company.
Right. From the very beginning, that idea in a garage.
All the way through going public, the inevitable midlife struggles, and, well, sometimes extinction. It's quite a dramatic arc.
It really is. And we're looking at sources that chart not just the company's internal stages, birth, youth, decline, but also those huge external forces.
Yeah, things like the economic climate, market cycles, stuff that can make or break a company no matter how good the idea is.
Exactly. So our mission today is to kind of unpack that for you, highlight those key moments where, innovation meets capital, and then how the whole thing has to wrestle with forces way beyond its control.
Okay, let's jump right in then, starting at the beginning, which is often surprisingly simple, isn't it? That garage phase. It sounds like a cliche, but you look in the history. The Body Shop, HP, Apple. They literally started in garages. Anita Roddick's, Packard's, Jobs' parents.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it, about needing that intense focus, maybe low overhead. Our sources call it the grit and gumption phase.
Grit and gumption, I like that.
Yeah, it's pure necessity driving things forward. Take Apple, founded in '76. Jobs was 21, Wozniak 26, college dropouts.
Right. And Wozniak's idea was pretty specific, wasn't it?
Incredibly. A simple computer for people who weren't experts. That was the core concept.
So how did they fund this world-changing idea initially? Not a big bank loan, I'm guessing?
Definitely not. They literally sold what they had. An old VW van, couple of calculators,
Wow.
raised about $1,300. That financed the first 50 Apple I units.
$1,300, that's it.
That's it. And when that cash ran out, well, the project was basically dead unless they got help. Which brings us to the angel.
The angel investor. Often, like a rich friend or family member, someone willing to bet on a long shot.
Exactly. But it's not charity. They want a big piece of the action, a significant share for putting up that early risky capital.
So who is Apple's angel?
It was Mike Markula. He was retired, background in electronics and marketing from Intel and Fairchild. Apparently, he thought Jobs and Wozniak were amateurs at first.
But he saw something.
He saw something. He bought a 1/3 share for $250,000. And immediately, he brought in structure, recruited Mike Scott as president, hired Regis McKenna for advertising.
The guy who designed the Apple logo.
That's the one. So suddenly it's getting more professional.
But it means, even at this early stage, the original inventors already own less than, what, maybe 2/3 combined?
Less, potentially, because the pie is growing, sure, but more people want a slice, especially when the venture capitalists, the VCs, show up.
Ah, the VCs, they come in later, right?
Yes, crucially later. They wait until the idea is proven, the product's actually in production. It significantly lowers their risk compared to the angel.
So they're like the third wave of money after the founder's initial bit and the angel's investment.
Pretty much. They want to see a track record. For Apple, this was around 1979. A group of VCs invested $7.2 million.
Okay, so now they have serious capital, they're scaling up. What's the next huge step?
Going public. The IPO, initial public offering. This is arguably the biggest transformation for any company.
Why is this such a monumental change?
Because suddenly you're living in a financial fishbowl. Complete transparency. Before, they answered to founders, the angel, VCs, maybe a handful of people.
Now they answer to the whole market.
Exactly. Investment banks manage this whole process. It's called the underwriting. They take the company on a roadshow to pitch shares to big investors.
And they produce that document, the prospectus, the rule book, essentially.
That's right. It details everything about the company, including all the potential risks. And there's that term, red herring.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that. Doesn't it mean the warnings are printed in red?
That's a common myth. No, it's called a red herring because the preliminary prospectus before it's final is incomplete. It's like a distraction, a false trail, not the final approved document. The final one has the warnings, but the term red herring refers to that preliminary, not quite there yet version.
Got it. Okay. So there's this funny irony someone pointed out. A person's life ends with an undertaker and a tombstone.
And a company's public life begins with an underwriter and a tombstone ad in the newspaper announcing the IPO.
It is kind of poetic, but who actually gets to buy those initial shares? Is it easy for, the average person?
Usually not, no. When Apple offered 4.6 million shares in December 1980, they sold out in an hour.
An hour. Wow.
Yeah. And those shares, mostly reserved for the big players, fund managers, institutions, people managing millions or billions. Small investors often get shut out, especially back then with certain state laws like the Blue Sky laws in Massachusetts designed to protect people from fraud. They actually blocked the sale there initially.
So the little guy misses the initial pop, usually. What happens to all that IPO money then?
It gets divided up. The investment banks take their cut, the underwriters, then the founders, the angel, the VCs. They usually sell some of their shares to cash out a bit.
Makes sense. They took the early risk.
Absolutely. And the rest, the bulk of it, goes into the company's coffers for expansion, R&D, paying off debt, whatever they need.
And the payoff for those initial believers can be pretty huge.
Astronomical. For Apple, after the first day of trading, Jobs, Wozniak, and Markula were each worth over $100 million.
From that $1,300 start. Just 4 years earlier. That's incredible.
It really sets the stage.
Yeah.
But now the company enters youth.
Right. They're flush with cash from the IPO, full of optimism, but maybe not much real-world experience running a big public company.
Exactly. And this phase is super risky. Statistics show half of all new businesses fail within 5 years.
Even after a successful IPO, what's the biggest killer then if they have money?
Ironically, running out of cash.
Yeah.
Still. Massive expansion costs, maybe a product flops, high burn rate, just running the now larger operation. The IPO money can disappear surprisingly fast. If they survive that, then comes the midlife crisis.
And Apple hit that pretty early, didn't they? Less than 10 years old.
Yeah, they had the money, the fame, but they stumbled badly.
What went wrong?
A couple of big product failures. The Apple III computer was notoriously unreliable, a real lemon. They had to halt production. It really damaged trust.
Okay.
Then they launched the Lisa computer. It was expensive, aimed at the business market dominated by IBM, and it failed. Big time.
So poor strategic moves, poor execution.
Yep. And the market reacted. Apple's stock price dropped by 50% in about a year. It shows that having capital isn't a magic bullet if the core business decisions are flawed.
And this must have caused chaos inside the company, especially with Steve Jobs.
Oh, definitely. This is where that public company structure really bites. They needed a turnaround, so they brought in John Sculley from PepsiCo.
The Cola Wars guy, not a tech guy.
Exactly. Hired for his marketing prowess. He shifted focus away from the failed Lisa towards the Macintosh. It was cheaper, easier to use.
And it worked.
It did. They sold 70,000 Macs in just 3 months. It saved the company, basically. But it cemented that internal conflict. Scully and the board versus Jobs.
Because once you're public, the founder, even a visionary like Jobs, doesn't automatically get their way anymore.
Precisely. It led to huge internal strife. And eventually, as everyone knows, Jobs was forced out for a time. It shows how messy corporate democracy can be.
So that's the perilous youth in midlife. What about companies that actually make it through all that? The ones that get to be 20, 30, 50 years old. They hit old age.
Right. And in corporate terms, old age often means your best growth years are probably behind you. You start running out of room to grow.
Like Woolworth. Used to be everywhere.
Exactly. Once you've saturated your market, how do you keep growing exponentially? It gets much harder.
There's a real danger in becoming a blue chip, isn't there? Seen as safe and stable, but maybe stagnant.
Absolutely. Look at U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar company, dominant force in 1900. Rock solid.
Yeah.
Yet its stock in 1985 sold for less than it did back in 1959, even while the overall market, the Dow, soared over 4,000 points in that time.
Wow. So being big and established is no guarantee of future success.
None at all. Stasis is deadly. U.S. Steel, General Motors in the 60s, they got complacent. GM was too slow reacting to smaller, fuel-efficient foreign cars.
From Japan and Germany.
Right. They stuck with their big cars for too long. IBM similarly struggled when the mainframe market started to decline, and they didn't adapt quickly enough to the personal computer revolution they initially dismissed. It's a failure to adapt, really.
And when these giants falter, or even when they just have piles of cash they don't know what to do with, that's when we get the corporate soap opera.
Yeah. Mergers, which are like corporate marriages, divestitures selling off parts, those are the divorces.
Yeah.
And takeovers. One company swallowing another.
Can be friendly or hostile, right?
Exactly. And honestly, takeovers are often driven as much by ego, the acquiring CEO thinking I can run that better, as by pure financial logic.
Is there a difference in what they acquire?
Yes, a key one. There's synergy, where the companies fit logically. Like Hershey buying Reese's Candies. Makes sense, right? Candy companies. Or PepsiCo buying fast food chains like Taco Bell or KFC back in the day. Drinks and snacks fit.
Okay.
Then there are conglomerates. They just buy anything, totally unrelated businesses. These often fail because management gets spread too thin, they lose focus. The classic example was Gulf and Western.
What did they own?
Oh, everything from movies, Paramount Pictures, to sugar and zinc mining. Their nickname was Engulf and Devour. Didn't end well.
So synergy good, random conglomeration, often bad, and the final act.
Extinction. Either dying young, running out of cash like we said, or dying old, becoming obsolete. The legal mechanisms are bankruptcy protection. Chapter 11 lets them try to reorganize and survive.
Like a last chance saloon.
Sort of. But if it's truly over, it's Chapter 7. Liquidation. Sell off the assets, pay the creditors what you can, and close the doors for good.
A dramatic end. But through all this internal company drama, there's this huge external factor, the economy.
Absolutely. The whole thing happens within a specific economic climate, which is completely out of the CEO's control. And unlike, say, 200 years ago when farming dominated and weather was key.
Now it's man-made factors.
Pretty much. Interest rate set by the central bank, overall consumer spending, inflation. These are the big drivers now.
And the Federal Reserve, the Fed, their actions can directly impact whether a startup in that garage phase even survives, right? Affects their ability to borrow.
Massively. Let's quickly define those climates. First, you have the hot climate. Business is booming, demand is high.
Sounds good.
Seems good, but the big worry is inflation. Prices rise, so interest rates tend to rise to cool things down. counterintuitively, stocks can actually drop here.
Why?
Because investors worry companies can't grow earnings fast enough to beat inflation, and borrowing for expansion gets expensive.
Okay, then the opposite.
The cold climate. A recession. High interest rates eventually bite. Consumers stop buying big-ticket items, cars, houses, appliances. Stuff piles up in warehouses.
Yeah.
Layoffs happen.
How long do those usually last?
Post-World War II, the average U.S. recession is about 11 months long, costing around 1.6 million jobs on average.
Yeah.
Companies whose products are sensitive to economic cycles, cyclicals, get hit hard.
And the ideal?
The Goldilocks climate. Not too hot, not too cold, just right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really hard for policymakers to maintain that perfect balance.
And maintaining that balance, or trying to, is the Fed's job, climate control.
That's a good way to put it. If the economy's cooling too much, they lower interest rates, pump money into banks to encourage lending and spending, heat it up.
And if it's too hot, risking high inflation.
They raise interest rates, drain money out, try to cool it down gently.
And all this manipulation creates the never-ending drama in the stock market. The bulls versus the bears.
Exactly. Bull markets feel great, everything's going up, maybe 9 out of 10 stocks hit new highs. But they don't last forever. History shows we get corrections. That's a drop of 10% or so, roughly every 2 years on average.
Only 10%. Doesn't sound too bad.
Well, then there are bear markets. That's a drop of 25% or more. Those happen, on average, about every 6 years.
Okay, that sounds worse. And people panic, right? Try to sell before the drop.
Constantly. Everyone tries to time the market. Get out before the crash, get back in at the bottom.
Does it work?
The evidence is pretty overwhelming. No. Far more money has been lost by investors trying to anticipate corrections than has been lost in the corrections themselves.
Really? How can that be?
Because trying to time it usually means you sell too early or you stay out too long and miss the recovery. The recovery often happens very quickly, right after the worst point.
Is there a key statistic on this?
There is. Looking at the S&P 500 index over 4 decades, if you simply stayed invested, your annual return was about 11.5%. But if you missed just the 40 best months during that whole period.
40 months out of 40 years, so less than 1 month per year.
Exactly. Just missing those 40 specific months dropped the annual return from 11.5% all the way down to 2.7%.
Wow. That's a stark.
It really is.
Yeah.
And get this, the difference between someone with perfect timing, impossible by the way, and someone with just plain lousy timing, who bought high and sold low. It was only about 1.6% difference in annual return over the long haul.
So trying to be clever with timing barely helps, but missing the best days absolutely kills your return.
That's what the long-term data suggests. The most effective solution seems to be simply staying invested through the ups and the downs. Ride it out.
So looking back at the whole journey, that company starting with $1,300 in a garage, fighting through product flops, facing down economic headwinds, it really shows that adaptation and maybe just patience are key.
I think so. Adaptation to survive the internal crises, and patience to weather the external economic storms you can't control. The market forces are relentless, but maybe simpler to navigate than we think.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. We hear all this data. Economic expansions last, on average, 50 months and create over 9 million jobs. Recessions are much shorter, average 11 months, lose about 1.6 million jobs.
Right, the growth periods are much longer and more powerful than the contraction periods, historically.
So, given that overwhelming long-term reality of expansion, does the intense focus most investors have on short-term fear, dreading that next bear market, trying to avoid it, does that actually distract from the bigger picture?
Yeah.
Could that fear be counterproductive to long-term success?
Something to think about. Where should the focus really be?
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a really fascinating period of change in American wealth. We've got sources centered around the Forbes 400 list, tracking shifts from the early 80s into the 90s.
Yeah, and what we want to do is really dig into who had the money back then and maybe what that tells us about how success works, even now.
Okay.
And what jumps out right away, comparing, say, the 1982 list with the one from 93, is just how much the source of wealth changed. It shifted, away from those old family dynasties.
Towards the self-made types, right?
Exactly, the entrepreneur
That's like a
quality.
perfect snapshot in time, isn't it, that 1982 list? I mean, it feels like you almost needed a 19th century name just to get on it.
That's a good way to put it. The early 80s list was, well, it was like a monument to old money. You had the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Mellons.
The big established names.
Right,
Yeah.
fortunes going back generations. And if you looked at the little bios they wrote for that first list, the word inheritance popped up something like 65 times. Yeah. It was definitely the era of J. Paul Getty's advice. Rise early, work hard, strike oil. And he meant it literally.
Okay, so then fast forward just over 10 years to 1993. That picture looks pretty different.
Totally different. It's an incredible shift.
Yeah.
By 93, if you sort of count the whole huge DuPont clan as like one inherited fortune,
Okay.
only 43 people on that entire list got there just through inheritance.
43 out of 400. That's a huge drop.
Massive. And it leads to a couple of really interesting conclusions for you listening. First, maybe counterintuitively, it's actually really, really hard to keep a massive fortune intact across generations.
Why is that? Taxes. Bad decisions.
Both. Inheritance taxes definitely play a role, but also, heirs sometimes just aren't great at managing or investing the money.
Makes sense. And the second conclusion.
Well, that's the more optimistic one. It really backs up that whole idea of the American dream.
Land of opportunity.
Precisely. It shows America was still this place where you could build something huge from scratch. We started seeing the rise of these, real Horatio Alger figures.
The classic rags to riches story.
Yeah, people who made it on, as the source puts it, pluck, luck, and a great idea, not because their great-grandfather owned a railroad.
And the starting points for these new tycoons are just, well, they completely shatter any idea that you need some fancy background. Mailrooms, you mentioned.
That's where it gets really grounded. Harry Helmsley, the real estate guy, mailroom. David Geffen, music and movies. Mailroom, too.
Seriously.
Yeah. And Ray Kroc, McDonald's, right. He wasn't some chef. He sold milk mixing machines traveling around.
And Sam Walton, Mr. Walmart himself.
Started as a trainee at JCPenney. Not exactly Wall Street.
But I think my favorite has to be Curtis Leroy Carlson, the trading stamp king.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. He was selling soap, making like $110 a month. Then he somehow gets a $50 loan.
$50.
$50.
Yeah.
Starts the Gold Bond Trading Stamp Company. Shows you can bootstrap an empire.
Grit over pedigree, every time.
It seems so. And speaking of pedigree, or lack thereof, the sources point out something else interesting. The number of famous dropouts on these lists.
Ah, yes, the dropout myth. Bill Gates leaving Harvard.
Larry Ellison leaving University of Illinois. Kerkorian didn't even finish junior high.
But there's a big but here, right? Especially for anyone listening today thinking about their own path.
A huge but. This is really crucial. When guys like Gates or Ellison dropped out, they'd already kind of mastered the skills they needed for what they wanted to do. And importantly, they dropped out to start a company.
They weren't dropping out to avoid work.
Exactly. They were diving headfirst into something they were passionate about. The source is pretty clear. The job market's way different now. Trying to get a good job today without any college or higher ed, it says it's, quote, nearly impossible.
So it's less about skipping school, more about intense focus on a specific goal.
Right. And the ideas themselves were all over the map. It wasn't just tech or oil anymore.
No, people made fortunes in, auto parts?
Auto parts, yeah. High-risk car insurance, which sounds niche.
Coffee creamer, yellow pages.
Even the single-handled faucet, someone invented that and made a bundle.
And wasn't there a lawyer making money from sore back cases?
Yep. Apparently a very lucrative specialty.
Goes to show there's opportunity everywhere if you look. Or feel the pain, I guess.
Right. And the beginnings were often just tiny. Hewlett-Packard started in a garage. They had like $538 worth of parts.
The classic garage startup story.
Totally. Walmart began as a little five-and-dime store in Arkansas. Amway. They started in a basement making biodegradable soap.
It seems like that discipline, that frugality from the start, often carried through even after they hit it big. We picture billionaires with yachts, but that wasn't always the case.
No, it's this weird paradox. You see incredible frugality sometimes. Sam Walton drove this old beat-up Chevy pickup. Apparently his dogs chewed on the steering wheel.
Seriously, billionaire.
Lived in a modest two-bedroom house. Warren Buffett still lives in Omaha, not exactly Beverly Hills. Likes his cherry Coke and burgers.
Gordon Moore from Intel.
Drives an old pickup truck to work.
It's not really about being cheap then, is it? It's more about focus. Their success wasn't measured by how much they spent.
I think that's right. It was about efficiency, discipline, sticking to what worked, and that kind of discipline.
Well, it brings us to Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
He represents another big shift on that 93 list.
Because he made his money differently.
Completely differently. He was actually richer than Bill Gates at that point, around $10 billion.
Hmm.
And he made it all through investing, stock picking.
The first pure stock picker to get that high on the list. What was his secret? It sounds so simple.
It is deceptively simple. No complex algorithms, no rapid trading. He just buys shares in good, solid, understandable companies.
Like Coke, Gillette.
The Washington Post,
Okay.
companies he understood. And then he just holds them. Holds them until, in his words, it gets very boring.
Patience pays off then.
Big time.
Yeah.
The source mentions if you'd put $10,000 with Buffett, say 40 years before that list came out,
Yeah.
it would have been worth around $80 million.
Yeah.
$80 million. From 10,000. Wow.
It's just staggering. A real lesson in patience and looking for real value, not just hype.
Okay, speaking of value in iconic companies, let's dive into some of those origin stories. Coca-Cola's start was less than glamorous.
Ooh, less than glamorous is putting it mildly. It was downright suspect. Dr. John Stike Pemberton created it as a patent medicine.
Like snake oil.
Pretty much. It was billed as a brain tonic and a cure for all nervous afflictions. Had sugar, water, caffeine, cola nut, and extract of coca leaf.
Ah, the coca leaf.
Yeah, and initially, it was a total flop. He spent nearly $74 advertising it in the first year and only sold $50 worth.
A disaster. How did it even survive?
Basic Candler saved it. Bought the recipe for $2,300.
Yeah.
Candler was the marketing genius. He got rid of the coca leaf extract. Coke was cocaine-free by 1905, way before it was illegal. And he ditched the crazy health claims.
Smart move.
But here's an interesting investment lesson from that Candler era. During the Great Depression, when everything was doom and gloom,
Yeah.
Coke stock went nuts. It went from $20 a share in 1932 to $160 by 1937.
While the economy was collapsing.
Exactly. The lesson being, ignore the pessimism, look at the actual business profits. Investors who did that made a fortune.
And then it went global. How did that happen?
World War II was the key. American GIs were everywhere drinking Coke. The source calls them the most effective unpaid sponsors ever.
Ah, I bet.
It became this symbol of America, which, funny enough, is why the communists in Russia and France apparently hated it after the war.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift gears from a global giant to something, well, different, Ben & Jerry's. They built a brand on being unconventional, right?
Totally. Started by two friends, Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield. Met in gym class in 7th grade.
Classic.
They started in 1978 in an old gas station in Vermont. Jerry actually took a $5 correspondence course on ice cream making.
$5, love it. And their whole company culture was different.
Very different. They deliberately kept executive salaries low to reduce the gap with workers. Said nobody should make a killing while others struggled.
And they impacted the local economy, too.
Yeah, they paid Vermont dairy farmers extra for milk, which helped revive the industry there. Plus, they gave away 7.5% of their profits to charity every year.
And that story about finding a new CEO.
Oh, that's great. When Ben stepped down, they had a contest. The guy who won didn't send a resume, he wrote a poem.
Only Ben & Jerry's. Okay, one more origin story. Wrigley's Gum. That was kind of an accident.
A total accident. William Wrigley Jr. was selling his dad's soap back in 1891. He started giving away baking powder as a little bonus prize.
Okay.
Then the baking powder wasn't popular enough, so he switched the prize to chewing gum. And pretty soon, people wanted the free gum more than the soap.
So he just ditched the soap and sold the gum.
Exactly. Total pivot. And he was a marketing pioneer. In 1915, get this, he mailed a free stick of gum to every single person listed in every phone book in the entire United States.
Every single person. That's ambitious.
Talk about mass marketing.
These stories really highlight the founder's drive, which leads us to this idea of the corporate hero. Your sources suggest that view got kind of lost in the 80s.
Yeah, there was a lot of anti-corporate sentiment then. But the argument here is that maybe we should see successful business leaders less as villains and more as the invisible hands driving the economy.
Okay, how so?
Well, the idea is we should actually cheer their success because it's often tied to our success as investors or employees.
Through stock ownership?
Primarily, yes.
Yeah.
Executives get rich mainly through stock options, so their interests align with shareholders. When Michael Eisner did incredibly well at Disney and his shares went up 11 times,
Yeah.
it wasn't just him. Every pension fund, every small investor holding Disney stock benefited too.
Okay, that makes sense. But the bigger contribution, the source argues, is job creation, right?
Uh-huh.
Like Leah at Chrysler.
That's the prime example. Saving Chrysler wasn't just about the company. Ayakaka saved about 116,000 jobs directly at Chrysler.
Which is huge.
But the ripple effect was way bigger. It probably saved over 300,000 high-skilled jobs in all the supplier industries. Tires, steel, glass, everything. That's saving mortgages, college funds, a much bigger impact than, say, a sports star hitting a home run.
That really reframes that narrative of American decline we heard so much about in the mid-'80s, especially compared to Japan.
Absolutely. There was so much pessimism back then. Books like The Reckoning predicting doom for U.S. industry. But under the surface, things were turning around.
Like in the auto industry.
Exactly. While everyone was focused on Japanese imports, Chrysler and Ford were busy inventing the minivan, redesigning the Jeep. They fought back. And investors who saw that comeback happening, who bought Chrysler stock near the bottom in '86,
They did well.
they made 15 times their money. 15.
Wow. And overall productivity was actually improving.
Significantly. By the early 90s, the U.S. workforce was the most productive in the world, generating almost $50,000 worth of goods per worker per year, about $10,000 more than the average worker in Japan at the time.
How did that happen? Especially when we heard so much about layoffs.
Well, the layoffs were part of it. It was painful, no question. Big companies, the Forbes 500, did cut about 3 million jobs during the '80s.
Which sounds terrible. How is that heroic?
Because the alternative was likely far worse. The argument is that this restructuring, this downsizing, was necessary medicine. If those big companies hadn't become leaner and more competitive, many would have simply gone under.
Taking all the jobs with them.
Exactly. The potential job losses could have been catastrophic, maybe 10 to 15 million nationwide, if those giants had failed completely. So the cuts were tough, but they might have saved the whole system.
Okay, so if the big guys were shrinking, where did the growth come from? Where were the new jobs?
Small and medium-sized businesses. They exploded. While the giants cut 3 million jobs, these smaller companies created 21 million new ones in the '80s.
21 million.
Yeah, it was like 2.1 million new businesses starting up, hiring maybe 10 people each on average. Think about companies that basically didn't exist in 1975, like Amgen or Home Depot or Staples.
Right, they became huge later.
Between 1985 and 1995, just as the big companies were still cutting, those kinds of growth companies added 1 million jobs.
So the dynamism shifted to the smaller players.
Completely. And that's where the really huge investment returns were too.
The 10 baggers you mentioned.
Or even 50 baggers. Companies like Oracle, Compaq, Amgen. If you got in early, the returns were astronomical, like 40 or 50 times your money in a decade.
What's the lesson there for an investor?
You don't need every pick to be a winner. If you invest in a basket of these small, growing companies, just 1 or 2 massive successes can more than make up for all the ones that don't pan out.
So, wrapping this all up, all these stories of resilience, odd beginnings, patient investing, what's the core lesson? It seems pretty straightforward.
It really is almost deceptively simple. Find something you genuinely love doing, something you're passionate about. Pour yourself into it, and often the success, the money, it follows from that dedication.
Because you don't stop working at it.
Right. The people who built these fortunes, they weren't just punching a clock. They were often having too much fun building their thing to ever really stop.
Okay, so for a final thought for our listeners, something about corporate resilience. We talked about companies that kept growing, turned around, or accelerated. But there's one institution you mentioned that has this huge, quiet impact. Fannie Mae.
Yeah, the Federal National Mortgage Association. Fannie Mae. Its job sounds simple. It buys mortgages from banks, bundles them, and guarantees them, which keeps money flowing for new home loans.
Okay, keeps the housing market moving.
Exactly. But think about the scale. Fannie Mae itself only has about 3,000 employees, tiny for its impact, but its stability affects millions of homeowners. Its CEOs back then, David Maxwell and Jim Johnson, basically saved it from near collapse in the '80s.
And if they hadn't? If Fannie Mae failed?
The entire housing market could seize up. No new mortgages means no new homes being built. That devastates home builders, real estate agents, appliance stores, lumber yards. The ripple effect is enormous.
So, the heroism there is just good management, keeping this crucial pillar stable.
Precisely. Sometimes the most heroic act isn't some flashy turnaround, but just quietly, competently managing these huge, systemic institutions that prevent widespread disaster. It's a different kind of corporate resilience.
A powerful reminder that sometimes the biggest impact comes from ensuring stability behind the scenes.
Well put.
All right, that's our deep dive for today. Lots to think about there. Keep exploring.